This lesson will explain the theory behind diminished chords and their function. There's a lot of confusion around how diminished chords work in music. I often get asked the question of when to use them in a chord progression. As with music in general, there are no hard and fast rules, except if it sounds good, play it. But I'll take you through some of the tried and tested functions diminished chords can serve in your music. To diminish something means to lessen it. Diminished chords have an unstable sound, which can be described as lessening or destabilizing the music. They create an air of tension and unresolve, which is what makes them wonderful chords to use in your music. There are three main types of diminished chord, as shown in this table. Diminished triads, half diminished chords, and diminished seventh chords. As you can see, there's a common occurrence of the root, minor third and flat fifth in the three types. These are the most important tones in any diminished chord or scale. The flat fifth in relation to a minor third is what gives it that unstable quality. So a diminished triad can simply be thought of as a minor chord with a flat fifth. A half diminished chord is the same diminished triad with an added flat seventh, also known as a minor seventh. This chord is also sometimes written as minor 7 flat 5. A diminished seventh chord is a diminished triad with an added diminished seventh. Now that's another way of saying double flat seventh. So the only difference between a diminished seventh and half diminished chord is the seventh is flattened another semitone in diminished seventh chords. First, just make clear in your mind these distinctions, as each one has a different sound and function, which we're going to look at now. Firstly, occurrences of the diminished triad are often extended to half diminished or diminished seventh chords because they sound more interesting. Essentially, you're playing the diminished triad in both these variations anyway, so they're just a meatier, more colourful version of the triad. So whenever there's an occurrence of a diminished chord, then you should try both half diminished and diminished seventh, and go with the one that sounds best to you. Let's look at some typical uses of the chord. The first we're going to look at is known as a leading tone diminished chord. In major keys, a half diminished chord naturally occurs on the 7th degree, called the leading tone. In plain English, that means whatever the major tonic chord is, the diminished chord naturally sits one semitone down from that. It's called a leading tone or leading chord because it naturally resolves or leads to the tonic. That example was in the key of C, but you should be able to see the same leading tone chord and tonic relationship no matter what key you're in. In minor keys, and especially minor keys based around harmonic minor, a diminished seventh chord is the natural leading tone chord. Now we're going to look at what's known as an altered 3 chord. In major key progressions, the 3 chord, which is naturally a minor chord, is sometimes replaced with a half diminished 3 chord. You'll hear this most commonly used in jazz. Here's an example, again in the key of C major. It's also commonly used in jazz to extend the 2-5-1 turnaround as follows. You can hear how the tension in that half-diminished 3 chord is transferred to the augmented 7th chord before the natural 2-5-1 resolution. Half-diminished chords are also often used as the 2 chord of major and minor key progressions before the 5 chord. We can also use a diminished 7th chord on that same 2 chord root in place of the 5 chord. A diminished 7th chord can resolve to a chord with the same root. This is known as a parallel chord change. For example, if the tonic was E major, and you could also do the same with a minor tonic. What this does is effectively destabilize the tonic. Now, essentially, you can fill any whole step interval between 2 chords in a scale with a diminished 7th chord. For example, here's the major diatonic chord scale. We can literally plug those whole step gaps between the 1 and 2 chords, 2 and 3 chords, 4 and 5 chords, and 5 and 6 chords with a diminished 7th. Again, you'll hear this most commonly used in jazz, but there's no reason why it can't be used in music in general. Again, playing in the key of C, let's hear some examples of this technique. Those are pretty simple progressions, but using that diminished 7th plugging technique adds some spice and unpredictability. There's more on diminished chords in the lesson on fretjam.com, including a really useful trick based on what is known as the symmetry of diminished 7th chords. There's also a chord chart showing you the different voicings and positions of the 3 diminished chord types. The bottom line is to experiment with using diminished chords in your own songwriting. Cheers.